Classic examples of this are Thomas Jefferson and his idea that he would kind of go through different religious texts, that he was generally kind of open to religion, but he was open to a particular form of religion that he appropriated for himself, that he experimented with, and that in his mind was based in his own individual conscience, and nobody should be able to tell him differently. So the Enlightenment kind of gives this very kind of individualistic owning of religious ideas that should not be tampered with by either state authorities or, in Jefferson's case, religious authorities, that instead he was his own individual religious authority, basing this in his own freedom of conscience. And also coming out of the Enlightenment was a kind of skepticism, if you will, about the ability of political freedom and religious freedom to coexist. The skepticism led to a concern to kind of delimit and block off religion from politics. And one of the simple reasons for this was that in Europe in the 1600s and 1700s, a heck of a lot of wars and violence was fought over the connection of these two. So coming out of this, the founders of the United States in particular in this Enlightenment tradition wanted to separate these two spheres, these two authorities, these two institutions, so that violence driven by religious visions and hooked up with political boundaries and political agendas would no longer be the rule of the day. Their idea is if you could pop these two apart, these religion and politics apart, or these church and state apart, you wouldn't have such violent outcomes as you'd been having for a long time. So moving along in a quicker way than any historian would ever be happy with, we come to the U.S. case, and we come to a couple things. The readings that I gave you for Monday illustrate some of what ended up happening in the United States. We have Jefferson's short writing in the Virginia Statute, in which he talks about how religious belief needs to be free, it can't be coerced, how political rights are separate from religious beliefs, so no matter what you believe religiously, you still get the same civil liberties, you still have the same political rights. And Jefferson, important to note, assumes kind of a general kind of gaudy language is existent in the United States at the time, but he's tempering that to try and separate general God language from particular beliefs and particular religious groups, allowing kind of the space for freedom of religious belief. And then we have the Whitty reading, which was a tough reading to do, where Whitty talks about a whole kind of range of meanings for these two key clauses, right? And the two key clauses were the Establishment clause in the First Amendment and the Free Exercise Clause in the First Amendment. And what's important is both of these clauses were present or are present in the First Amendment. And what Whitty is trying to do is to take us into the history of these clauses, how they came to be, and tell us what they might be about. And he says that you can actually interpret these in a whole slew of ways, and that is built in at the founding of the country, and a lot of what the struggles are today around church and state issues is how the heck to interpret what these clauses were saying at the time and what they're saying now. And he paints with a broad brush, but what he's trying to say is that in terms of establishment, we know that it's clear that the Congress at the founding of the U.S. Constitution was saying that there would be no laws to establish a state religion, though it's open or not whether Congress can make any laws that support all religions, okay? So whereas Congress is saying we're not going to establish a federal level religion, they are not clear, as I mentioned, with Thanksgiving and chaplains and prayers, which are rules that they made for themselves. So it's not clear that they can't say anything about religion. It's just clear that they're probably not going to claim one religion to be the rule of the day in the United States of America. So you can see it's muddy as hell, okay? And then you have this other clause, this Free Exercise Clause, which put alongside all the rest of the Bill of Rights seems to say that there should be absolutely no impinging on the religious practice of individuals and religious groups in the United States. But remember, assume that religion exists, pretty important, didn't really have a whole lot of minority religions in mind. Basically, the United States was populated at this time mostly by different Protestant religious groups, by some Catholic religious groups, and a smattering of a few other religious groups of Jews or Muslims. But for the most part, it was a dominant Protestant hegemony. And so the founders kind of assumed that as the background painting for anything that would happen going forward. And so a question of religious diversity pressing this free exercise clause was not going to be much of an issue in terms of the founding of the Constitution, but as we'll see in a minute here, becomes a huge driving force going forward in church-state conflicts. So let me pause here again for a second.